Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and really happy to have Elly Griffiths here with us. We're going to be discussing her fantastic new standalone book, Postscript Murders, and also...
It's not a standalone. Let me interrupt. I thought it was, but it actually comes after The Stranger Diaries with the same detective. So I am at fault in telling you it's a standalone.
But it is a sort of standalone, she says, jumping between the two of you. It's a standalone with the same detective.
Thank you. Very good.
And then I'm sure we'll be getting a taste of the Ruth Galloway that's just come out in the UK, The Nighthawks, which will be out here in June. And for those of you watching on Facebook, I'll be monitoring the comments. So if you have questions for Elly, go ahead and put them in and I will pop up as usual, I don't know, 40 minutes or so in to ask some of those questions. So Barbara, I'm gonna hand it over to you.
Thank you, Patrick. I was just holding up my cup because I love this design. It's actually from the Santa Fe Railroad. And it's a very Arizona design, but I would like you to know, Elly, in your honor, I'm actually drinking tea.
It's absolutely beautiful. It's so lovely. I'm going to show you mine, which has Ruth Galloway's Norfolk on it.
Oh, I love it.
Oh, which was sent to me by a reader.
How fabulous.
Isn't that lovely?
Yes, it really is. I mean, you could be drinking wine because it's evening over there.
I could, but I will, even if there is wine in here, I'll blow on it to make it look like it's tea.
I love it. Okay, so I'm going to hold up a copy of the Postscript Murders, and indeed, it is a complete mystery, but the detective Harbinder Kaur, whom we will talk about, appeared in Elly's Edgar-winning The Stranger Diaries. Elly has won a number of awards from the Crime Writers Association in Britain and the Mary Higgins Clark Award, and also the Edgar from the Mystery Writers of America. So I will bow down. I'm so impressed. Good for you. I thought that when I just did a little research, I read that you might have read some earlier books under your actual name because Elly Griffiths is a pseudonym, and I know nothing about those.
Yes, well, and I might even be appearing on screen under my real name, which is Domenica De Rosa, which does sound made up. I think that's the strange thing, is that my real name sounds exactly like a pseudonym. It sounds completely made up, and it sounds kind of like a romantic novelist's name, doesn't it? But it is my real name. And yeah, as Domenica De Rosa, I wrote 4 books that were sort of all about... They were mostly set in Italy because my family is Italian. In fact, Domenica De Rosa in Italian means Sunday of the Rose, which is rather nice, isn't it? So I wrote 4 books sort of set in Italy, all about families, relationships, history, that sort of thing. And then it was only when I had the idea for The Crossing Places, which is the first Ruth book, that my agent said to me, oh, she said, this is crime. You need a crime name. So I chose Elly Griffiths because that was my grandmother's name. And somewhere along the line, I don't even know where, I became Elly. And I do remember saying to my editor, I'm very lucky I've had the same editor in Britain for all the books, Jane Wood. And she said, I said to her, why did I become Elly? And she said, I don't know, I think it just looked a bit tidier. So there you are. I became Elly because it was a bit tidier.
I love that. I can hear Jane. I've known her for many, many years.
Oh, well, you could hear. Jane and I have the same birthday, actually. So we're astral twins. So we get on amazingly. But you can just hear her saying that. Yes, it's just a bit tidier.
I can. Yes. She's a brilliant conversationalist and always succinct.
Yes. And always, like you, Barbara, beautifully dressed. Always looks beautiful.
Oh, aren't you kind? I wish you could really see the best part of what I have on are my fabulous earrings. Which come, lovely. Speaking of Italian, this is way off point, but what the hell? There's a wonderful Italian architect, now deceased. His name was Paolo Soleri, and he was a disciple of Frank Lloyd Wright. And he came to Taliesin West here in Phoenix to study under Wright, and eventually opened his own studio called Arcosanti, which is all about earth casting and communities where people all live together and the whole bit. But to make money to support this whole foundation, he makes what are called Soleri bells, which are either cast in bronze or in pottery, and are gorgeous. But they have a sideline which are making earrings. If I come really close,
it's so beautiful.
But it's pottery. It's not
Oh,
turquoise.
is it ceramic? Wow,
Yeah,
wow,
exactly. And so anyway, I
Oh,
don't know how I got off on that. It must have
that's
been
so
too funny.
interesting. How lovely.
Yeah, so they have a place here in Phoenix. So should you ever come to visit us, which I hope one day you might do, I will take you there, and then you can be all Italian.
That's a deal. I want to go there.
Ruth, I came to your books through The Crossing Place, and Ruth Galloway, I think, is amazing. I don't want to say archaeological mysteries because they're more than that, but Ruth is in fact an archaeologist, and they all revolve. I've been to Norfolk, I've been to all that area, the Fens country and the whole bit that you write about. And it is a mysterious country, and because it's so boggy and wet, things get preserved, right? So it's a good place, sort of like Ireland and all the stuff that's buried in the peat.
Yes, it is. I mean, those bogs, and also in sort of places like Denmark, and yes, those bogs are perfect for archaeology. And it was really the marshes that gave me the idea for the books, because my husband's an archaeologist. So, and as I said, I'd written these 4 books all about sort of Italy and families and things. And I was kind of thinking, what should I write next? And we were on a holiday in Norfolk because my aunt lives there, and we were walking across some marshland called Titchwell Marsh with our 2 children who were young then. And Andy happened to say that prehistoric people thought that marshland was sacred because it's neither land nor sea, but something in between. They saw it as a kind of bridge to the afterlife. Neither land nor sea, neither life nor death, like an in-between zone, a kind of liminal zone. And that's why they buried bodies there, because they were between life and death. They were in that sort of to mark that boundary, really. And it was like a light bulb going off in my head. That in that moment, I sort of thought of the plot of The Crossing Places, and I did see Ruth walking towards me out of the mist. It's never happened to me before or since, but she did just kind of appear with the idea, really.
She's truly fabulous. And her relationships and the people, the ensemble cast, so to speak, is remarkable. You like to put people into really unusual, difficult, complicated, and we can't really fully see where it's going kind of relationships, like Ruth and DCI Nelson, right?
I think that's the thing, though, isn't it, about writing a long series? And for me, it's one of the challenges of it, but it's also quite a privilege, because when I wrote sort of standalone books, my first 4 books, you might put your characters in a difficult situation, say, a pregnancy or a birth or a death, and then you'd leave it and you'd never know. But if you write a series, it's like you sort of have to face up to the consequences like you would in life, because there's always a next day, well, until you've got to the end, so there's always something that's going to happen, and one decision, as we all know, then affects loads of people, and it spreads out, and the effects are shown, and if there are children, as there is a child in this case, they inexorably grow older, and there are different challenges as they grow older. So I do feel that's kind of one of the things about writing a series, is that you have to, as a writer, you end up having to live with the consequences of that sort of wild decision that you make. Oh yeah, let's make them do that. Or sort of they make it in a way themselves. And then you as the books go on, you're living with that, really. So it has been really interesting. Yes, you're right, because the book that comes out in June, The Nighthawks, is number 13. So it's so complicated now.
I'll bet it is. I'm waiting for my British copy to arrive, and because I always steal one and read it first before we sell them out to customers. So I can hardly wait to see.
Oh,
I do think, in crime, since you choose to have in all 3 of your series, in crime anyway, an amateur as a lead character, you do have to have somebody from law enforcement who's in the story, who can do the actual arresting and other stuff. So Ruth has her policeman and lover, on and off, DCI Nelson, with whom she co-parents a baby, which was a truly rash decision, but you've had to live with it.
By somebody, yeah.
You do. And in your Brighton series, we have magician Max Mephisto, but he served in the war with a gentleman who has now risen in 1960s Brighton to the position of superintendent in the police. So they have that comrade in arms kind of relationship that makes that work. And in the books we're going to talk about in a minute, DC Is she DI? Is she a detective?
She's DI. No, she's still DS now.
That's what I thought. All right.
Yeah.
Harbinder Kaur, who is from India. She's gay, she's single, still lives with her parents in the flat upstairs, the family shop. But I want to go back and talk to you for a minute, because the couple of things that I love, well, many things I love about your writing, but two of them really stand out. I'm not actually a fan of present tense narration, but you make it work. That seems to be your natural voice. But the other thing you do, which again, I don't see all that often, but is amazing the way you do it, is that you write in third person omniscient. And for anybody who's wondering what that is, I looked it up just to make sure that I could say it correctly. All right, so does the narrator tell the story from only one perspective or from multiple perspectives? Answer for Elly, definitely multiple perspectives, which I like. Does anything happen in the story the narrator doesn't know about? If the narrator knows everything that happens, clearly it's omniscient. Once again, Elly. Does the narrator's voice change from character to character, or does it remain the same? If the narrator uses language and tone in describing the story with all the characters that's similar, then again, it's likely to be omniscient. So do you think that part of your special niche and success comes from the fact that you write in the present tense and third person omniscient? I know it's a complicated thing, but you do have a really distinctive voice.
It is complicated, isn't it? And I teach creative writing, and sometimes it is quite hard to see it in your own writing. You know, I'm busy saying to them, you know, I suppose I would think that the voice that I use is kind of, as you said, it's close third person. So it's third person. So it's not I, although in the Stranger Diaries it's first person, but it's mainly third person. But you always see everything through the character's eyes. And in the new one, in the Postscript Murders, I really enjoyed having 4 such different characters and seeing, you know, they have a chapter each. I've never done that as structure before. So they each have a different chapter, and sort of seeing things through their eyes, and sometimes seeing the same event through different eyes. I did really enjoy that, I have to say. And it was, but it is also a challenge, isn't it, when you're writing a crime novel? Because, you know, you have to drop in the clues, and it's whether they notice the clues. So I did find it quite challenging. It was, and the present tense is a funny one, isn't it? Because as I was saying at the start of our conversation, that I wrote those sort of books, I suppose you might call them women's fiction, as Domenica De Rosa. And it's quite common in that genre to have the present tense. And I think I did in a few of them. And so I just naturally carried it on with the crossing places. But it is actually quite unusual in crime fiction, isn't it? And you can, in some ways it really works, because the reader experiences everything the same time as the characters. So there's a lot of tension. But in other ways, it can be quite challenging. It really can.
Well, I certainly see your point about having to hide clues so that, you know, if it's all out there, they don't notice them, which you do extremely well. But one of the things I like about it a lot is the fact that you get to you made wonderful comments that are kind of asides and often quite, I mean, you have a very humorous, but the humor doesn't lie so much in the mystery as it does in the comments that you make or have the characters make. I noted one, because I particularly like this, that to illustrate what we're talking about, I will just read aloud. It's about a character who grew up and, to his parents' surprise, not only became a priest, or wanted to become a priest, and ended up becoming a monk. He attended a private Catholic school where he was usually known as Hugo's brother. The only truly memorable thing that he ever did was to announce age 18 he wanted to become a priest. His parents, who were Catholic in the stubborn way some old recusant English families are, sticking to their faith all through the Reformation, never expected any of their children to take it this far. They clearly found it embarrassing and rather self-indulgent, in the same way that you don't expect your gymnastics-loving daughter to join a circus. I mean, that's so wonderful. And you couldn't do that if you were not writing in that omniscient voice. I mean, I can't see how you could ever put that into dialogue. You know, it needs to be something that we share as an overall presentation, but I can't see how the characters could say that to each other.
You're exactly right. You are right, Barbara. It was so lovely that you pulled that bit out, though, because I did quite like that bit myself.
I do too.
It's true. I was brought up Catholic, went to a Catholic school, and I had a friend who became a priest, and it did advise me quite a lot on this book. And, he did say, no one really, nobody expected him to take it that far, really. It was quite shocking to them. So I did want to put that bit in.
Well, you did. You had another lovely line where you said something about, anyone who's been to Cambridge has to announce that within the first 10 minutes of the conversation. Have one of the characters actually does it not for herself, but references the fact that her husband went to Cambridge, keeping it up.
It's a funny old thing, isn't it?
Oh, it is. I mean, and some of this, probably is more resonant in Britain than it is in America, in the same way that, for example, you were a Richard and Judy book club pick, which in this country hardly says anything at all. What in England, it's like being an Oprah pick, right?
Well, it is. It is that they're the sort of big TV book group, yes. So it is a real thing, and the two of them, I guess, they're very sort of British celebrities. They used to front a sort of breakfast TV program, and they're husband and wife, and they're great, actually, big supporters of books in the same way Oprah is. But yes, I think it doesn't. I really find those things interesting, though, because when I'm reading a book set in America, I love those little things that I might not necessarily get. Do you know what I mean? And I think, oh, that's interesting. So that's what that means, and and you think like the way Andy from The Office is always talking about his alma mater university, and it's so important to him, and Cornell, isn't it, that he went to, and that's something that maybe we wouldn't get, but I kind of love that.
Well, I do too. And of course, I've been reading British crime fiction for almost 70 years now. So,
you get all those things, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure it's for the really lazy reader, or whether people today, with the ease of just looking things up on Google, if they're confused, cannot solve that. Also, there's a ton of British crime shows on the long form television, which I would love to see your books eventually arrive at, because I think they'd be great. And so I think more Americans can pick up the difference, but you have a thing in here, I think it is that one of the characters refers to a license plate, and you say, well, in Britain, it would be a number plate, and it's kind of a clue, because, it's a subtle difference. Like we say faucets and you say taps.
Yeah. And trunk and boot of a car is another one, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. I love those things, though. And they can be clues. You're quite right, which is quite fun.
It is fun. So you live in Brighton, and
yes.
You have chosen the Postscript Murders. Let's finally get to the book we're supposed to be talking about. It's really in Shoreham-on-Sea. So I'm assuming it's also on the south coast and not far from Brighton.
Yes, Shoreham is just a little bit along the coast from me. So I live just outside Brighton, Saltdean, but on the other side of Brighton, if you just travel along the coast, there's Shoreham it's one of those sort of retirement-y places. It's really lovely, but it's also quite industrial. There's a power station there, and it's a big port. So there's a lot going on, which is quite useful for a crime writer, I think, to have a place that all sorts of things are going on at the same time. It's also near some very beautiful country, and I teach creative writing at a college really near there, near Chichester, called West Dean, which, Barbara, when you next come to England, you've got to visit, because it's the most amazing place, because it's a sort of stately home that was once owned by a man called Edward James, who was very into surrealist art. So it's a British old stately home full of weird surreal art. It's the strangest thing. And I teach, if you can't teach creative writing in a place like that, where can you teach it? So that really was the basis for the school in the Stranger Diaries, which was the standalone before this standalone. So the Postscript Murders is in that world. It's in that part of the country, a port that there's some very run down areas and some smart areas, and near some lovely bits of the country, but also rather handily for my characters, also really does have an airport, so they can travel around quite quickly.
Which is how they get to Aberdeen, which is important, or at least some people do in the story. The Granite City, which is, way up at the other end of.
Yes. They have a road trip, which I always like.
Yes, the road trip was absolutely wonderful. The cat's behaving very well, by the way, and makes a nice contrast, the black on the white chair.
Yes, he's very beautiful, isn't he, Gus?
Yes,
There.
yep.
So he's looking away from us now. He's fed up with us.
Very handsome. In fact, Peter Lepsey for a little while lived in Chichester, which is, he was from Bath, and I can't remember where he lives now. But anyway, yes, I've been there, and I do think it's a beautiful part of the country. But Shoreham-on-Sea seems to have some elements of what we here call Sun City West, which is basically, retirement homes. And you call them carers and we call them nurses, and you have a warden, and I'm not sure what we would call the person in charge. But basically, this begins when Peggy Smith, who's managed to get to 90, is found dead in her armchair and looking out at the beautiful view of the sea in her apartment in a care home. And the carer who finds her, Natalia, I'm sorry, do I have that right, Natalia?
Yeah, Natalka, yes, yeah.
Natalka, thank you, it's Ukrainian, not Russian. Suspects that she just is uneasy about it at the very beginning. Although Peggy had, she's 90, so dying in your sleep could happen to anybody. But Peggy had an unusual sideline, it would appear. Although I think at the end, and I don't want to give anything away, you hint that maybe she had a much bigger sideline than any of us ever knew, which I liked a lot. But anyway, so tell us what happens. Peggy is found murdered, and where do we go? Or found in her chair. Where do we go from here?
Peggy's found in her chair. She has a retirement apartment on the seafront in Seaford. And as you say, she's found dead in her chair. And people think that's very sad, but maybe not entirely to be unexpected. She had a bad heart. She was 90. Her carer, Natalka, comes, finds her body. And then later on, she's asked by the family to clear the room. And she thinks it's a little bit, but they say, box up all her books as if they're not worth anything, which Natalka slightly finds a little annoying. But when she starts to put Peggy's books in boxes, she finds that there are lots of crime novels, which is not necessarily suspicious. But then she sees that a lot of them are dedicated to Peggy. And some of them in the acknowledgements say things like, thanks for the murders. And there's some books in particular that say PS, see Postscript, thanks for the murders. And then Natalka finds some business cards which have Peggy's name on, and underneath it says murder consultant. So she thinks then that she should go to the police, and she does go to the local police station where she meets Harbinder Kaur, who is the detective who was in the Stranger Diaries. And at first Harbinder's a little bit doubtful about whether there is anything to investigate, but she agrees to come to Peggy's funeral to keep an eye out. But the day of the funeral, someone bursts into Peggy's apartment with a gun. So we know that there is a mystery, and that the mystery involves the books. And eventually Natalka, together with Benedict, who owns the local coffee shop, the ex-monk, and Edwin, who is Peggy's neighbor, end up trying to investigate this murder themselves, which involves this road trip to Aberdeen.
But before then, we have a best-selling author named Dex, who does a book signing in the area. He's down from London, and he stays on an extra night in order to attend a book signing. And the next morning, he's found shot to death. The fact that I know. And so that adds more weight to the idea that maybe Peggy was murdered. And then you have to ask yourself, is this a bibliomystery? Is this all about publishing? Because there's a lot in the story that would lead you to believe that, or is it going to be about something else, and the publishing is a red herring, as we say? I'm not going to give that away. But the fact that you worked in publishing obviously figures into this, because you know a lot about writers' conferences, bookseller events. And then, as you say, you take them on a road trip to Aberdeen, which is a pretty ambitious undertaking for some of the seniors involved. Have you been to Granite City?
I have, yes. In fact, I went to a crime writing conference there. So I thought at the time that it's an amazing place, Scottish city. And I thought a little bit more unusual maybe than writing about Edinburgh or Glasgow. But it has these two sides to it. So it's called the Granite City, and it's made of this really sort of solid dour grey stone. But it's also known as the Silver City because in certain lights it really shines and it's very, very beautiful and it's near beautiful bit of coastline. So I thought it would be a good place to set a story. And I really wanted to have a road trip. I love it when characters are sort of thrown together on a road trip. So in fact, Natalka, Benedict and Edwin go by car. And so they have one of those long road trips where they end up playing word games and then they all get a bit fed up with each other. Then they all have a bit of a laugh and then they stay the night at a slightly sinister sort of bed and breakfast on the way. And all those things happen that happen on road trips. So I wanted to sort of get all that into it, really. And I also wanted to, yes, as you say, I used to work in publishing. So, you know, I love publishing and I love books and book people. And funny enough, well, as you know, crime writers are terribly sort of friendly, aren't they? And clubbable and enjoy events. You just have to go to BoucherCon or any sort of publishing event to see. We just love a party. And I think it is maybe because we get out a lot of the nastier side of our nature in our books. You know, you get these amazingly big crime writers, you know, like so Paretsky or Val McDermott or Ian Rankin, and they're so lovely and charming to sort of lesser writers and newbies, and you do have these lovely events. So I'm feel pretty bad that I've killed off a few people at one of these events. Obviously nobody based on anyone in real life. But yes, so they go on this road trip up to Aberdeen where there is another murder. And so then Harbinder has to fly up and try and sort out the murder. So I must admit, I did really enjoy that aspect of it. And I did enjoy the fact that some of the clues might well be embedded in the books, or they might not be, as you say.
Or they might not be. Well, it's certainly true. The crime writers congregate in the bar. If that's the place, you know, if you want to really have a good time at any mystery convention, you definitely want to spend time after hours.
And it's always sort of, you know, everybody sort of milling together and readers and writers. And I suppose this book is really about readers as much as it's about writers, because a lot of the clues you get from reading, and Peggy, who, even though she dies quite early on, is a main character. A lot of the things she knows, the characters keep saying things like, well, how did Peggy know that? Did she go there? Was she a spy? Was this? But it's all really, a lot of it is just because she read a lot of books.
Very true. It's a wonderful story. I mean, you know,
Thank you.
Works on so many levels. And there are lots of people who really love, I am one of them, crime fiction that involves books or the book world, whether it's collecting or if it's the publishing process or, you know, writers or ghost writers and, you know, the whole bit. There's a whole, it's almost like there's a big shadow world that, you know, makes it extra fun. So there can be what we call Easter eggs in a book like this, depending on what you've read or what you have experienced. I loved you had a line towards the end. I'd have to look it up where I think it's I don't remember if it's Harbinder. One of them anyway settles down with a book when it's over, thinking that will be fun. And it turns out he makes some line about, you know, reading is more dangerous than what they were doing, which I really enjoyed. So tell me about Harbinder, because I mean, she's unusual. You've made her is Punjabi?
Yeah, Punjabi Sikh, yes.
Right. Although she was, when I'm trying to remember, was she born in the UK or did she come as a child?
She was born here, but her parents are sort of first generation immigrants, so she's second generation. Yes, so Harbinder is, she says in the first chapter or second chapter of this book, she awards herself a gold star for being the best gay Sikh detective in Sussex. Right. And then she thinks, oh, actually, I am the only gay Sikh detective in Sussex. So she's a fun character to write about. She does have this background, which I think makes her feel a bit of an outsider sometimes in her own town where she's always lived. She lives at home with her parents who don't, seem not to know that she's gay. So she lives with them, but actually she gets on very, very well with them. And I wanted to make that part of the story, really, that she gets on very, very well with them and loves them very much and they love her. But she's also quite a spiky character. And I really enjoyed that because she has a particularly spiky relationship with her work partner, Neil. And sometimes she can only put up with him by imagining that he's a little furry animal. So I did quite enjoy writing those bits, I have to say.
I thought the bits with Neil were great. And there again, only if you were writing in your third person omniscient voice could you possibly have Neil make a remark, and then you have him like fluffing his tail or scarfing a nut or something, you know,
Yes,
which
yes.
again is not
Twisting his whiskers
possible.
or something.
Yeah, I mean, you can only do that in the style. You're right. And it works really well in the Ruth Galloway books too. You know, you get an opportunity to tell us things that we wouldn't know. I did want to ask you, why did you decide to set the Brighton mysteries in the 1960s? Because these other two books, or two series, Harbinder and Ruth, are current, but
Well,
Max Mephisto is not.
really, that was because of my granddad. So my granddad was a musical comedian. I suppose vaudeville. Would you say vaudeville? Vaudeville musical,
Yeah.
variety, I guess you'd call it here. And that was his life. So and he brought my mum up. She was brought up just by her dad, and they had this life where they just traveled around, going to a different theatre every week. And I really wanted to write about that time and that world, really. And he was a lovely man, my granddad, and he died when I was about 15. I was really close to him. In fact, on my notice board, I'm going to get it for you, because it just stares at me every day. Is a picture of him. So that's him.
Oh, look
And
at him.
He was
Very
called Dennis.
yeah.
He was very dashing. He was called Dennis Laws, and he was he was in the First World War. He was a pilot in the First World War. Went all through the First World War, and then afterwards he said to my mum, after everything I'd seen in the war, there was only one job I could do, and that's to become a comedian. And that's what he did. He became a comedian. It was sort of mildly famous, I guess, between the wars. But when he died, he left me his playbills, and I wish I had one of those to show you, because they're names on them. They're things like Lou Lenny and her unrideable mule. And you think, what's that? You know, who's that? Another one is Ray Deeney, the gay deceiver. And I don't know who he was or who was deceiving. So when I wrote the Brighton Mysteries, as they're called now, they used to be called the Magic Men, I wanted to write about that world, really, that sort of vanishing world. So they start in 1950. But also the character of Max Mephisto, who's a magician, is based a little bit on a real life magician who was called Jasper Maskelyne, who in the Second World War, he was asked by Churchill to do that, to get together a group of magicians and to use stage magic in the war effort. So to use things like camouflage, sleight of hand. And so they were called the Magic Gang. I've called them the Magic Men in the book. But so there was a sort of a kernel of real truth in that. So that's why I wanted to set them in that era. And I have to say as well, my goodness, it's so much fun as a break to write about a time with, you know, no mobile phones, no DNA, you know, people saying things like, oh, what happened to old Ray Deeney? I don't know. Whereas, of course, now we'd be Googling him. So it is really nice to write about that world. And I've just finished one, I think, that comes out maybe early next year in the US, called The Midnight Hour. And, you know, characters say, oh, I tried to ring you, but you don't have a telephone. You know, it's a different world, isn't it? And I do enjoy that.
I can certainly see that. I mean, it's a lot harder to do things with the technology. We've been watching a British crime series called Scott and Bailey, set in Manchester. And there's one moment in which Jill, the head of their unit, brigade, whatever she calls it, has to overcome the idea that a serial killer locked up in Cambridgeshire somewhere, might be innocent in favor of he's acquired a copycat or worked out something with a copycat killer in order to get himself out of prison. And the way she stands there and directs what they have to do is just mind-boggling. You know, they have to track his phone. They have to, you know, I mean, it's just phenomenal that she keeps all this in her head. And it's so technological, even though really the solutions do depend on character and reading of character or actions. Nonetheless, what the police in Britain, particularly with all your CCTV and everything, can deploy, and, you know, reading through phone records, people are trying to erase their tweets or erase their phones, you know, but tech services brings it back. And then you can say, you never knew him, but you had 9 conversations on this mobile number, you know.
So whatever. They know where you were, don't they, as well? Yeah.
I mean, the only safe thing if you're going out to commit a crime, which the people who stormed our Capitol here in January found out, is leave your phone at home. Because if it's with you, you know, there's an absolute complete ability to trace where you are and when you were there.
Yes.
So, you know, and I think, why is it that people are so wedded to their phones they can't even imagine going to participate in a riot and take their phone with them?
Yes.
I mean, you might as
Yes.
well just hold up your hand and say, here I am. Anyway, I can certainly see the appeal of 1960s. But are you going to keep up? I mean, I would hate it if you didn't keep writing Ruth, and you really liked the Brighton mysteries, and now you've had 2 wonderful books with Harbinder. How do you keep up that kind of a schedule?
Well, I'm writing 2 books a year at the moment. I've done that for the last few years. So it's a Ruth every year, and then it's a standalone. Though, as you pointed out, they're not exactly standalones because they do have a continuing character, or a Brighton mystery. There will be a few more Ruths, definitely. So I've just finished number 13, which is the Nighthawks, the one that comes out in June. And I'm writing the next one out, which is number 14. So there will be a few more. I mean, I feel like I'm sort of almost getting to end game now, but there will be some more. And there will definitely be some more Brighton men, but maybe in the future I'll just write 1 book a year. I can't see myself ever stopping, but maybe I might stop writing 2 books a year. Also, I publish a children's series, which isn't published in the States, which is a murder mystery for kids. Called A Girl Called Justice. So this year there'll be 3 in the UK. There'll be 3 Elly Griffiths books. You can't get away from, you know, like they say, you're never more than a few yards from a rat. You're never more than a few yards from an Elly Griffiths book.
Wow. Well, I admire your energy. I wish I could tap into it. That would be wonderful. And I certainly
You have a lot of energy.
Well, I do, but nonetheless, that's a lot. But on the other hand, I do have to say that I do think there are series that need to come to a natural end. You know, at some point, you really have said or done to those characters all that you can reasonably do. And, you know, I don't like them killed off. And I don't think many readers like it when, you know, favorite characters die, but you can kind of put them in a safe place, so to speak.
And even if you maybe have a pause, and I know Ian Rankin did that with Rebus, didn't he? He stopped for a bit, and now he's picked up, and Rebus is retired, and he's quite grouchy and goes around with his little dog. But I still really love them as much as ever. They seem to have, you know, a whole new energy, a whole different energy. But I think he sort of stopped and stepped back for a while, and now is writing them again. His little dog Brillo, that's right.
Yeah, but he has to bring other characters forward in the same way that Michael Connelly has, because they aged both their policemen in real time and, you know, aged them out. And we did Ian's launch party here in the United States in October. And that was one thing we talked about, is that Rebus has got some health issues that make it nearly impossible for him, you know, to be active.
Yes, to even climb stairs, or
yeah, because he has the, you know, the breathing whatever. And so I think his last book is truly fabulous. I
loved his last book.
Right, Patrick, you're going to have to remind me, what was the title? Patrick,
A Song for Dark Times.
Thank you. A Song for the Dark Times. And it's an amazing book, but you do see Rebus in a different role. So Patrick, come join us and tell us if we have any comments from or questions. I love the way he comes out of a black hole.
Yes, I do.
Right?
There he is.
Hi there.
Who needs magic?
That's right, exactly. Well, you have some very enthusiastic fans that are tuning in. Kathy, in particular, has a lot of questions here. Let me see here.
Is that my dear Kathy Boone Reel?
Indeed, it is.
Oh, she's a good friend of mine. Hi, Kathy.
And then there's another Kathy Ace.
And Kathy as well. Brilliant.
Canada.
Writer herself. Yeah.
Yes, great writer.
So let's see here. A lot of comments, a lot of people kind of weighing in how much they like the history in the Brighton series. Okay, so a question from Kathy. Harbinder is such a great character, and I enjoy, let's see, sorry, this is kind of hard to do. And I enjoy seeing her, where is it? Yeah, more of her family in this book. Elly, did you think that when you first wrote about Harbinder in the Stranger Diaries that she would be so popular with readers?
That's a really great question, Kathy. I didn't think she would be as popular because, as I was saying earlier on the chat with Barbara, she's quite prickly. And I think possibly if you met her, there might be a character that you would take one way or another, really. But people have seemed to like that, which I've really enjoyed. And I've loved the chance in this book to tell you a bit more about her family. And in fact, I have a good friend who's from a Punjabi Sikh background, as Harbinder is. And she's been my sort of cultural advisor, really, with these books. She's read them through. But in this book, her mum, who is called Balvinder, got involved too. And so she has been advising on the sort of food that Harbinder's mother would serve her, and all sorts of interesting things that I didn't know. I had Harbinder's mum heating up food for her. Balvinder said, no, a Sikh mum wouldn't do that. We wouldn't heat up food. So interesting things like that. So I've really enjoyed myself sort of finding out more about her home life and putting more of it in. So I do think that there will be at least one more book with Harbinder in, because if you've read this one, the Postscript Murders, you'll know that maybe it's a little bit more that she needs to do in her life. So I'd like to go with her on that bit of the journey.
I'd like to put in a plug for Harbinder's parents. Her father was lovely, and for Harbinder's parents' dog, a hero dog.
Hero dog. I love dogs. Sorry, Gus. Obviously, I love cats. But yes, and my parents used to have a German Shepherd, as Harbinder's parents do, and they were very similar. In fact, funny enough, coming from an Italian family, there are lots of similarities I found to an Indian family. But my parents were equally completely soppy about their dog, who was called Rocky, who was just the worst guard dog ever, and completely. But they were just convinced he was an absolute genius. And so the dog in this book is called Starsky, after one of my favourite ever detectives. He does prove a bit of a genius in the end.
That's Starsky, you said?
Starsky, yeah.
Is there going to be a Hutch?
Maybe there's a rabbit called Hutch.
Here's a question. She says, Kathy again, have you thought about writing a standalone about Peggy Smith and her friend, the author's aunt, who lived at Seaside View Apartments? Either or both of them seem to have fascinating lives hinted at.
Wow. Kathy, that's actually a really good idea. I hadn't thought about it, but I did feel quite bad about the fact that Peggy dies, obviously, in the first pages of the book. That's not giving a spoiler away, really. And so although her sort of shadow is over the book and we find out more about her, we don't sort of, there's only the prologue really in her voice. So I would quite like to do that. That would be really good fun. And also, I think I've said elsewhere, in some ways, Peggy is based on my aunt, who is, I quickly say, alive and well, who lives in a seaside house, very like Seaview Court, and who also comes up with fantastic murder plots, which she's always offering to me. So I would like to write about the bay window set. I would. Kathy, that's a great idea.
Kathy, you get 10%.
Yeah, well, we'll talk, Kathy, we'll talk.
Another Kathy Ace, she has a really good question here. She says, given all that you're writing, do you work on just one book at a time, or are you writing one, editing another, plotting another, all at the same time? If that's the case, how do you get yourself into the right mindset for each project? Is there a particular music or place, or is it just being a pro?
Oh, thank you, Kathy, and I love your books too. That's a really good question. I find that I can only write one book at a time. Like I can only be in one world at a time. So I'm either on the Norfolk, marshland with Ruth, or I'm in by the sea with Harbinder, or in 50s London with Max. So I can only be one place at a time to actually write it. But I do manage to, I have found that I'm able to write one book and edit another book at the same time, as that seems to be a different part of your brain, doesn't it? So there's the creating part, and then there's a sort of editing, tidying up part. They seem to be different bits. But the children's series that I was mentioning, Girl Called Justice, that's the only exception to that, because I do sometimes write a chapter of Justice just for fun for myself, because I find them such fun to write, that I do that at the end of the day. I think, oh, I can just write a little chapter of that. So I seem to be able to get myself into that mind. But I don't listen to music when I write, actually. I know lots of writers do. I like complete silence. And I'm speaking to you from a shed at the top of my garden, where I go every day to write, just me and Gus the cat. It's just the two of us sitting here working away. Obviously, he's working very hard.
There's an interesting question here, and I kind of lost it, but I know the gist of it. So let me paraphrase. And Barbara, you can weigh in too on this. You were talking a little bit earlier about different covers, designs, and things in different countries, and how they have different strategies for the artwork on the books, and also about the language. With British idioms and things like that, which might not be as familiar to an American reader, and vice versa. Is there pressure the question is something about, is there pressure to have a more universal language that, I hope not. Barbara, don't you agree as an American reader, we like unfamiliar language or idiomatic language that makes us curious, It seems like a universal, bland, worldwide language. How boring would that be?
I think you lose the flavor. I think
Absolutely.
you definitely lose the flavor of each country and language. I was a French major in college, and I studied a lot of languages, and idioms don't translate, not exactly. And you wouldn't want to lose that. But I also think that crime fiction readers in part read because they want to learn. I have preferred it over all others. Now, I'm actually a romance reader, a biography reader, Jane Austen, Georgette Hare, all of that.
Love to do that.
And I love action adventure books, I just adore them. But in the end, crime fiction, if the author is doing a good job, and authors who succeed at crime fiction have to do that, it's like a lifelong learning experience. I have a head full of completely useless knowledge that I have acquired it. And occasionally it does come in useful. So I think curiosity is a big motivating factor for crime fiction fans. And therefore the challenge of figuring out, we call it a cell phone, they call it a mobile, but you should be able to work out what it is. And
I absolutely agree, and it's part of the sort of fabric of the books, isn't it? In fact, some of my writers are favorite writers, whether crime otherwise, are American writers, Alison Lurie and Tyler. I remember as a child reading and being absolutely, still one of the books that affected me the most was To Kill a Mockingbird. But I didn't know what bangs were. I didn't know what a union suit was. I didn't know any of the things, but it was fine. It was part of the book. I was absolutely, in that world, and I wouldn't have wanted that to be translated. And I'm very lucky in that my American publishers, HMH, and my American editor Naomi is who's wonderful, is completely, she would never dream of saying, oh, you've got to say it's a trunk, not a boot, because she knows, I think it's all part of the book. My books wouldn't be, I think they're very British in their sensibility in some ways, and I think they would be very different if they weren't. But it's true, isn't it? And I don't know about you guys, but I've become, particularly during lockdown, obsessed with quite a lot of sort of European TV. So do you get Call My Agent there?
Loved it. It is my favorite of the things.
Me too. And I just now, delusionally, I'm afraid, well, you do speak French, Barbara, but I haven't done it at school. But zut alors, now I think I can speak French just because I watch Call My Agent. But wouldn't it be awful if that was translated? It's so much nicer to hear them say French things, and isn't it lovely?
Well, it also broadens your perspective on the world. When you're reading, when I was a kid reading books, if there's a word I didn't understand, which is all the time, you become curious and you say, oh, that's interesting. I want to learn more about that.
Yes, and I love, as Barbara says, I love learning. I've got a good friend, Leslie Thompson, who's, don't know if you've read her books, but I think you'd love them, Barbara. About a cleaner, actually, who solves crimes, called Stella Darnell. And she set one in Kew Gardens. Yeah. And I learned so much about plants, but I loved that. I loved learning in those books.
Hilariously, there are two books that have come out in the next, one just is out, one's coming out. Both the murders are set in botanical gardens. One in Italy and one in Sheffield, England, interestingly enough. And I thought to myself, I wonder if that's partly pandemic inspired, by the fact that maybe we're out in gardens. We have a brilliant botanical garden here called, oddly enough, the Desert Botanical Garden. But, what a great place to discover a body.
I wonder if that is because lockdown and we're all much more into our gardens. I know I am than I. It's just used to be a sort of grassy bit that was out there, and now we're quite obsessed with it. How fascinating,
Patrick.
I have a Carol asks. I have a non-Kathy question. Carol asks, any TV adaptations in the future for any of your work?
Oh, thank you, Carol, for asking that. Well, a TV company does have an option on the Ruth books, and so it could happen. I'm only just sort of sounding a bit downbeat about it because this has happened to me 3 times before. That 3 different companies have taken an option out and been very enthusiastic and have sort of talked about how early days, and they're like, oh, we'll have this, we'll have that, we'll have we'll have Christopher Eccleston, we'll have all these names get thrown around, and then it hasn't happened, but it could still happen. And actually, there's been quite a lot of TV interest in the Postscript Murders, which is interesting. And I wonder if it's because it has this cast of characters who are quite differing in age. You go from the sort of from Natalka, who's I think sort of early 30s, and Benedict to 80-year-old. Edwin and the other sort of cast of characters in between. So I wonder if that's why. But yeah, so there has been some TV interest, and there is a TV company which has an option on the Ruth book. So it could happen. And part of me would love that because, well, partly because I'd sell more books, but part of me would be really intrigued by it. But part of me also, you sort of think a little bit that the pictures are better in your head. I don't know. But yeah, we'll see. It could still happen.
Well, the Ruth books are so atmospheric, and I was thinking there are at least 2 TV crime series set in Wales, and I think that's in part because of the rich atmospherics in Wales, the landscapes and so forth, and certainly Vera up in Northumberland, up Tyneside is tremendously that way. So I mean, it seems to me that frankly, all of Cambridgeshire and the Marshes is well overdue for television. Yeah, no, it really
I
is.
agree with you. In fact, I've always thought that a Welsh actress, Ruth Jones, would be a good Ruth, actually. For me, she looks a little bit like Ruth, so I'd be prepared to make Ruth Welsh. But yes, it has to be in Norfolk.
No, she doesn't need to be Welsh. She's,
No, she doesn't. No, she doesn't.
Oh, it's great where it is. Patrick, carry on.
We have another casting recommendation, which is a good one. Mary Ann says Clive Owen as Nelson.
Ooh.
That's an interesting idea.
I like that. Yeah,
that's a good one.
Me too. Yeah, because Nelson is that would be in many ways trickier, to play Nelson and play him sympathetically than it would be Ruth.
Yes, it would. And he's I've got a good friend, American friend actually, Lynn, and she thinks that he should be played by Brendan Coyle, who is the actor who plays Bates in Downton Abbey.
Oh, right.
And I can sort of see that as well, though with no disrespect to Brendan, I wonder if he's now a little older than, well, obviously we're all a little older than we were at the beginning, but yes, I think it is almost more difficult to cast Nelson or Cathbad, the druid character.
Carol suggests Robson Green.
Ooh, people are coming up with good people.
Yeah. He's been very interesting in the Grantchester series. Although I actually hated the way they got rid of the original priest, the original will in the Grantchester thing. Gosh, well, I'm not even going to go into that, but I was really seriously annoyed. Carry on, Patrick.
Yeah, this is a question about the young adult series that Justice Jones, Kathy says, reading these books takes me back to the thrill I felt as a young girl reading mysteries for the first time. And the setting of the 1930s is great, with the dependence, and this is the important part for me, with the dependence upon sleuthing and not technology. Question, with 2 out now in this series, what are your thoughts about the future of those books?
Oh, Kathy, thanks for asking about those. I'm so glad you enjoy them. And I was saying at the beginning, I do think, that they're suitable sort of from anyone 8+, but I actually think they're, in fact, I'm going to send one to you, Barbara, because I think you'd enjoy them. Because I think they're suitable for anyone who likes a good murder, you know. And they're set in the 1930s boarding school, so you have that kind of locked room feeling, and justice has to solve the case within the school. And there's a new one out this year called The Ghost in the Garden. They're not, I'm afraid to say, published in the US yet, but they are out here and in a few other European countries. So it's happening slowly for justice. But in a way, I mentioned my granddad. Justice is kind of based on my mum, which is one reason why I love writing them.
I remember Val McDermott sitting me down in the garden of St. Hilda's College, Oxford, and telling me about the chalet school.
Chalet school, yes.
Which I had never heard of, you know, and then I thought, wow, how have I missed that?
Well, funnily enough, when we talked about I used to work in publishing, I used to work at HarperCollins, I edited some chalet school books.
Yeah. Did you really? Oh.
Yeah. And there's a fantastic scene in one of them where I know we're running out of time, where they're lost in the Alps, always getting lost in the Alps. And this woman's there with her 3 children. And so to cheer them up, she gives them all a cigarette. Different times.
Really were, indeed. Okay, Patrick, has final question or two lurking there?
Yeah, let's see. Well, while I'm looking here, can you tell us a little bit about yourself as a young writer just starting out? Did you always know that you wanted to write, and when did you really start doing it seriously and devoting yourself to it?
Do you know, I always wanted to be a writer, even before I knew what a writer was, I guess. I wrote a full-length novel when I was 11. There was a crime novel. It's called The Hair of the Dog, which must have been a phrase I'd heard my parents use. And later, when I was at secondary school, I used to write, we talk about Starsky and Hutch, I used to write little episodes of Starsky and Hutch. Fan fiction, I guess you'd call them. So I did always want to be a writer, and I kind of did the right things. I read English at university, then I went to work I went to work for a library first, then in publishing, and in a way that sort of put me off writing. And then I wrote what became my first published book when I was on maternity leave, expecting my twins, who are now 22, so it must have been 23 years ago. But I did always want to write. It, just like a lot of people, took me quite a long time to get into print.
Do you have any advice? 'Cause I'm sure we probably have some aspiring writers watching. Any advice for people starting out?
Yeah, well, first thing I would say is to write, because that's how you learn, and that sounds a very simple thing to say, but don't, for example, feel you have to wait for inspiration. Start writing, I would say, and then inspiration will find you. Don't feel you have to research. Just start writing, and then if you need research, it'll come. And I would also say, sort of have faith in your own writing. And if you do send it to publishers and they turn it down, it's not really a rejection. Remember, it's always a business decision with publishers. And they only publish books to make money. That's why they do it. That's their job, you know. That's not wrong. That's their job. Venture capitalists. So if they turn you down, it's just because they don't feel at that moment they can make money. It's a commercial decision. So keep trying and have faith in yourself and keep writing. That's what I would say. Somebody said to me, a very good thing, Gus is bored with this, but somebody did say to me, you can fix a bad page, but you can't fix a blank page. And I've always remembered that. So put something on the page and then you can fix it if it's not right.
That's great. Ian Rankin had some great advice, or he said that part of what keeps him going with his writing is that it enables him to answer questions that bother him, you know, in the world, you know, questions that, you know, through writing, he can address those questions.
Wow.
Pretty interesting.
It is, and I think that might also be something that we like in crime fiction, that quite often does do that, doesn't it? Addresses those questions and issues.
And well, it's also problem solving too, which I think, you know, sometimes we can't solve problems in our own lives, and it's satisfying to read about characters who manage to do that.
Right.
Yes, and there's resolution, isn't there? I think that's really true.
So maybe as a final question, since Gus has stretched and has left the screen here, let's see here. A further question about Hair of the Dog, your early, what would it be called? Juvenilia? How do you say that word? Juvenilia?
I'm not sure. Juvenilia, I don't know.
Juvenilia.
Your guess is as good as mine. What can you tell us about it? What? Wow. Well, it is. It's it's set in a village really near where I live now, actually, called Rottingdean, another place to visit if anyone comes to Sussex. And it's not a bad premise, actually, though I say so myself. It's about a group of young people who live in a village where nothing much happens. So they stage a fake murder to bring the press and the media to the village. But then, of course, the fake murder becomes a real murder. So, and one day I might even turn it into a short story or something, because I don't think it's a bad idea.
Does the manuscript still exist?
Not all of it. My mum had some of it, and when my mum died, I did find some of it in her papers. So I actually haven't got the end of it, and I've slightly forgotten who did it. But the beginning of it's there. Yeah,
Exactly. You can
I'll
easily
share it.
fix that. Well, I just saw Gus go by with his.
Yeah, he's just gone by, and he's now doing that thing of you can't see him, but he's staring at me, you know, in the way that cats do, in that I want something away and I'm going to just stare at you, but I'm ignoring him for now.
No, he thinks your attention has been focused too long elsewhere.
I think he does.
So it's time to do that. Elly, this has really been just a delight. I'm so glad we got to talk about all of your books.
So much fun.
It really has. So we'll have to talk when another one comes out, or if there's somebody that you would enjoy talking to, since our schedule is endless. I know it. We had 2 pop-in events that came up today, one with Dean Koontz and one with Dennis Lehane.
Wow.
That's our life, you know. So,
oh my goodness.
I know it is really fascinating. If there's somebody that you would enjoy talking to, whether in the US or the UK, just let me know, because we see.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been so much fun, Barbara. Thanks for fitting me in. Gosh, when I hear the other people you're talking to, I feel very honored. Thank you.
Oh, it's really been a pleasure. We really have been fans of your books from the beginning. We have brought in UK copies of all of your books, which we greatly appreciate. And we're waiting impatiently for Nighthawks, but again, it will come out in June here, so that'll be great. And the Postscript Murders is a Poison Pen. It's the March British Crime Club pick. And we sold out, so we reordered it, which is really good. Anyway, it's a fabulous book. I truly, truly loved it. So thank you for writing it. Thank you all for watching this. There will be a podcast made of this, and this video will stay forever on our Facebook video page. So recommend it to your friends. So enjoy the rest of your day. Have a great weekend. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks for all your support. Thank you. Bye.